The warnings are blaring all over Europe. The red flags are there for everybody to see. Russia is planning something dark in the Baltic region, and it may be Estonia that is the subject of Putin's aggression. What happens if Russia invades Estonia? That's the question we're going to answer here as we look at a potential invasion scenario hour by hour. What will Russia do? How will NATO react? Is Estonia ready for any of this? Stick with us as we start with the prelude. The warning signs were all there, literally. It had only been in June that the US delivered a warning to Poland that Russia was planning some sort of provocation, up to and including an invasion. Poland listened, but it was the Baltic states that really took note, as Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk warned that the coming months may be critical and that the fears of a Russian escalation were palpable. Russia might try something in Poland, but the real threat would be posed to Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia. The latter knew only too well that Russia was planning something. It didn't know what, but a buildup had started that put Estonia on notice. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had already made plenty of claims that the Baltic nations were next on Putin's agenda. Those claims had the potential to harm cooperation, but as Estonia saw more signs, it had to admit that the warnings had substance. By late June 2026, Estonia had spotted Russian tankers that were supposed to be carrying liquefied natural gas, armed with machine guns, and with sandbags mounted in the Baltic Sea. Defense against interception? Perhaps. Estonia would find out soon enough. Russia also suspended all traffic through the railway border checkpoints in Latvia, Finland, and Estonia in early July, likely to stop Russian civilians from unwittingly crossing into Estonia. The warnings weren't empty. Just a few months later, Russia invaded. Hour 1. It starts with missiles and drones, rather than infantry and tanks. The latter are waiting. Russia had been building infrastructure on the Baltic borders in the months leading up to the invasion that could house thousands of soldiers. They will come. But first, Estonia faces an attack just like the ones that Ukraine deals with every day. Iskander and Oreshnik missiles smash into Tallinn and other Estonian cities as hundreds of Russian Shahid-type drones swarm. Estonia saw it all coming. Air and ground surveillance along its borders detected the drones and missiles. But without the huge stockpiles of interceptor drones that Ukraine has, Estonia struggled to stop Russia's Shahid-type drones. And though the country had earmarked $1.2 billion to spend on a modern air defense system, likely a Patriot, it hadn't arrived in time to stop the missiles. By the end of the initial Russian onslaught, hundreds of Estonian civilians were dead. Russia then started sending in the troops and the tanks. Small infiltration units at first. Estonia counters with soldiers of its own, but it knows that the timer has started. As Russia escalates, Estonia's job will be to hold out for as long as possible, defending itself against Russia as best it can so that its NATO allies can get their act together. Estonia knows it isn't going to win in a straight fight. It hasn't been helped by a decision by the US to pull over 500 of its soldiers out of Estonia for what the US called a summer rotation. Estonia had no idea when those soldiers were coming back, and now it's too late. If Russia's attack had caused one American casualty, Estonia would have been guaranteed a US response to shut down Russia fast. As it stands, the nation has an army with 7,700 active members and 230,000 reserves to take on a Russian force that could potentially number over 3 million if Putin mobilizes and dedicates everything Russia has to its latest invasion. Things haven't gotten quite that far yet, but as the invasion escalates, Estonia knows that the countdown has begun. Studies have shown that it would take Russia just 90 days to conquer all of the Baltic states. Tallinn could fall much faster. It could be as little as 60 hours before Russia's tanks reach Estonia's capital. The job is to hold the line. Estonia's army gets to work. The next 23 hours. Officials all over Europe start scrambling. Many had expected a Russian attack to come at some point, but not yet. Ukraine had warned that early 2027 would be the time. Germany thought that Russia would be ready in 2029, but the attack had come earlier than anybody had expected, and all of Europe, especially those nations that are NATO members alongside Estonia, know that the call is about to come for them to fight alongside their ally on the eastern front that has just developed. In the meantime, Estonia is fighting for its life. As preparations are made for the triggering of Article 5, the drones and missiles still fly, and Russia's ground invasion is getting larger. Small units of infiltrators start evolving into larger units with tanks and armored vehicles. Estonia is responding by hunkering down and trying to hold its fortifications. trenches were dug in preparation for this. Estonian drones start flying, and its own armored vehicles go out to meet the Russian invaders. HIMARS launchers are unleashed. Estonia had bought 3 more of them in April 2026, and those launchers become key to a long-range strategy that Estonia uses to smash Russia in the rear as the front line spreads. It won't be enough to stop Russia, just slow Putin's forces down. However, Estonia knows that it has an ace up its sleeve, giving it a tragic yet very real hope for a fast NATO response. The US troops might have been withdrawn. However, there are NATO forces from other nations in Estonia. Back in 2024, the UK had designated a brigade to Estonia's defense, and British soldiers now find themselves on the front line of a war with Russia. NATO had also upgraded its air policing mission in both Estonia and Lithuania in July, which not only means that jets have been scrambled to take on Russia's drones and missiles, but also means other foreign soldiers are fighting against Russia in Estonia who are citizens of NATO member nations. Estonia doesn't want it to happen, but a casualty among any of these foreign forces would play in Estonia's favor by ensuring a much more rapid response from NATO. 24 hours in. Article 5 is officially triggered, perhaps the most important article in the entire NATO Charter. Article 5 calls upon NATO members to provide assistance to any single member that experiences an attack on its own territory. And Estonia needs that assistance more than ever. Putin expected this. He knows full well about Article 5, and he understands that his invasion would trigger it. What he's banking on is that NATO members take so long to decide whether to provide help, how that help will be provided, and when it will be sent that Estonia will have fallen by the time that NATO has figured everything out. Putin has worked hard to sow division in NATO, even playing his role in manipulating the US to publicly call out its NATO allies, and even threaten withdrawal on several occasions. The more time that Putin's machinations buy for Russia, the better its chances in Estonia. This is a very real fear for Estonia. Typically, Russian provocations against NATO members have led to the triggering of Article 4, leading to consultations rather than action. If Estonia went down that route, it could take weeks, even months, for the triggering of Article 5 to deliver a response that Estonia needs. Estonia knows that it doesn't have that time. For that matter, so do the members of NATO. But the only precedent we have for Article 5 being triggered is the 9/11 attacks, and it took NATO's members several weeks to come to a consensus on how to respond in 2001. Still, Article 5 has been triggered. Estonia's leading officials work day and night on what amounts to a diplomatic mission to get the NATO wheels in motion faster than ever before. All Estonia can do is hope that these efforts work. But before we go deeper into this invasion scenario, this is a quick reminder that you're watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to hit that button and ring the notification bell to ensure that you catch what we have coming next. 48 hours in. Estonia's preparations for this invasion are keeping Russia at bay, barely. Tanks and armored vehicles are now in play. However, Estonia has spent millions of dollars building up its border defenses, and they're slowing Russia's invasion down. Shelters built in cities are already occupied by civilians, protecting them as best as possible from Russia's missiles and drones. On the front, which is rapidly growing to encompass all of Estonia's 294-kilometer border with Russia, the fighting rages. Camouflaged armored vehicles in the Estonian woodlands have been carrying out ambushes on Russian troops. Anti-personnel mines deployed all over the border have been hitting Russian troops and tanks, slowing the advance. In the forests, hundreds of bunkers, thousands of dragon's teeth, and untold numbers of ditches are playing their parts in the slowdown operation. Estonia is also putting the many lessons that it has learned from the Ukraine war to the test, especially when it comes to its use of drones. Back in May, Estonia spent over $8 million to open a new drone and electronic warfare testing laboratory, and it had already started to expand its domestic drone production in the months before. Estonian troops put the training they've been receiving to the test as they carry out drone strikes against Russian tanks and troop gatherings. But Russian forces are still advancing. Even with the barriers, the numbers are simply too high. 60 hours in. Right around the anticipated time, Russian forces break through the border defenses and reach the outskirts of Tallinn. Narva has already fallen. The border city, which is closer to St. Petersburg than it is to Estonia's capital, didn't stand a chance once the river that gives the city its name was crossed. In the Baltic Sea, Russia is amassing naval forces. Time is running out. Tallinn is on the brink. Estonia might have hoped that the likes of Poland and the other Baltic states would have come to its immediate defense, even without NATO approval. That hasn't happened. Both are wary of Russian ships amassing in the Baltic Sea, and they also have the Kaliningrad exclave to worry about. They're ready to fight, but they need the rest of NATO involved in the battle. 72 hours in. The discussions are breathless as NATO's members watch as a key part of its eastern flank against Russia is on the verge of being overrun. A decision has to be made. Putin is relying on NATO being too slow to answer the call. 72 hours is already devastating for Estonia, as ground is being lost in Tallinn by the hour. NATO calls Putin's bluff. There will be no sternly worded condemnation or useless call for Putin to stop what he's doing. What's happening in Estonia is an existential threat to all of Europe, and NATO's European members know it. Putin won't stop with Estonia. He'll attack the other Baltic states next, and then perhaps onto Poland. Article 5 was triggered. Now it's approved. Estonia isn't ready to breathe a sigh of relief yet. It knows that it can fight alongside its NATO allies well. The spring had seen Estonia take part in a massive drill that included 12,000 soldiers between May 4th and June 1st, and that drill had also involved Ukrainian representatives who passed on lessons learned from the Ukraine war. However, Estonia also knows that NATO committing to the triggering of Article 5 is just the first step. Troops have to get on the move. Plans need to be made. It might be weeks before a full NATO response is seen. But Estonia has some reason to cheer. The Baltic Sea, which is sometimes referred to as NATO's strategic sea, is surrounded by 8 NATO states, including Estonia. The other Baltic states, Poland and the Nordic states such as Finland, Sweden and Norway, can respond faster to NATO's call than most of the other European NATO members. Tragically, some UK soldiers have also lost their lives in the defence of Estonia. That has triggered action from the UK as it sends warships and submarines into the Baltic Sea. Sweden's island of Gotland and Denmark's Bornholm quickly become strategic choke points that slow down Russian warships and prevent them from focusing their firepower on Estonia's coast. Polish forces begin to advance toward the Baltic region. Kaliningrad, as dangerous as it was, is dealt with quickly. A firestorm unleashed by NATO's eastern air power razes most of Russia's Kaliningrad bases, in addition to taking out many of the electronic warfare hubs in the exclave that could cause problems in the Baltic Sea. Kaliningrad isn't useless. Any missile launch sites that NATO doesn't destroy start firing, though each launch reveals a location and is followed up by an airstrike. NATO's wheels are turning. Estonia continues to fight. 2 weeks in. Most of Estonia is occupied by Russia, but with the other Baltic nations and Poland in the fight, as well as the Nordic nations, the Estonian withdrawals have been tactical. And now there is a clear front with thousands of troops on either side, which has slowed the Russian advance to a crawl. More NATO forces are flooding into the Baltic region by the day. As logistics are worked out, a pipeline of weapons starts being fed into the Baltic region. Poland is establishing itself as a standout. Its forces have already entered and taken Kaliningrad in the wave of the airstrikes. Being NATO's largest spender as a proportion of GDP is coming to bear, as Polish tanks, armored vehicles and modern aircraft help Estonia to start pushing the Russian forces back. Of course, Russia isn't just using what it came with. As NATO forces move into the Baltic region, Russia sends reinforcements by the thousands. The plan is simple: create the same kind of grinding war that Russia is fighting in Ukraine. If that's enough for Russia to take Estonia or one of the other Baltic nations, Putin will have leverage that he could use to force NATO to the negotiating table. Estonia's forces have another problem to deal with. Around a quarter of Estonia's population consists of ethnic Russians, and some of those people are fighting against Estonia from within. Saboteurs and hacking groups are weakening Estonia's defenses and attempting to cripple its social structures. Estonia didn't have time to deport the large proportion of non-citizen Russian residents on its turf before Russia attacked, and they're causing problems. Still, the tide is starting to shift. NATO acted faster than Putin expected, and Russia is starting to feel the pain. 1 month in. Breakthrough. European NATO was quick to respond to Russia's invasion of Estonia. The US was slower, but after a month of fighting, the US has seen that Russia has gone far beyond provocation. Though the war is still restricted to the Baltic region, too many are dying, and the US realizes that. For all of the administration's bluster, its power base in Europe is under threat, especially now that it's not just Estonia involved in the fight. The US starts sending troops. They'll take time to arrive, but they are coming. A signal has been sent to Putin that whatever test he was attempting to carry out has failed. If all of NATO squares off against Russia, NATO has the advantage in every department. Almost 3 times the number of active soldiers and more aircraft, tanks, armored vehicles, ships, and artillery can be brought to the fight. Putin keeps on pushing. But he has another problem that is ultimately Russia's undoing. 2 months in. Putin's calculus for the Estonia invasion relied on a slow NATO response and a rapid overrunning of Estonia. Neither worked out. And now his problem is that he was so arrogant in his belief that he could take Estonia before NATO responded that he didn't wait until the Ukraine war had ended. Russia now finds itself fighting two wars, one on NATO's eastern flank and another in Ukraine. A catch-22 has emerged. If Putin pulls troops out of Ukraine to fight in the Estonia region, Ukraine can retake ground. Vice versa, NATO pushes Russia's forces further back. And all of the while, NATO's logistical pipelines keep soldiers and equipment flowing toward the eastern front. Both sides are firing missiles at one another. NATO's superior air power means that Russia's military facilities are being destroyed with missiles and bombs. But with the US involved, Putin knows that he can't resort to nukes, not without an equal response that would make this war a world ender. And besides, he didn't want to fight all of NATO. He wanted to take Estonia and maybe the other Baltic nations, and then force NATO's remaining members into negotiations. Russia has spread itself too thin. Putin should have listened to the former director of the Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service, Rainer Sachs, when he said that Russia lacks the capacity to expand its war westward, and that it's vulnerable to aerial strikes after Ukraine has done such an impressive job of taking out so many of Russia's air defenses. Now, Putin is watching those words play out. Splitting his army is also a problem. Many of the soldiers that he's sending in to fight against NATO are poorly trained reserves who are preparing to be fed into the Ukraine meat grinder. They're not ready for a combined NATO force that has been training for this type of war. NATO's forces are also cooperating with Ukraine more directly than ever before, and that raises the prospect of NATO sending soldiers into Ukraine to battle against Russia. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Estonia should have fallen quickly, but it didn't. And now, Putin, in his desperation, has to make the decision to withdraw. He tested NATO and he got a lot more than he bargained for. What we've presented here is one possible scenario of many that could happen if Russia invades Estonia, and this is likely the best case scenario. So much depends on NATO's response: the speed, the strength, how involved the US is, and how logistical pipelines are set up. The timing of the invasion is also a factor. We've assumed that the Ukraine war is still ongoing as Russia invades, but Putin might wait until that war ends, assuming it doesn't anywhere near the timescale Putin needs to actually carry out an invasion of Estonia. We've also made another assumption, that Russia would even be capable of invading Estonia with a strong enough force in the first place. That isn't a given, especially as the Ukraine war has already caused so many problems for Russia. Numbers don't lie. Casualties in Ukraine are too high for Russian comfort. A demographic crisis is happening, and any other invasion would only make Russia vulnerable to enemies that it doesn't even know it has. Do you want to find out more? Well, check out our video. And if you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to see more from the Military Show. And thanks for watching.